just want to give you an introduction to the third halacha, the third paragraph here. We had spoken about that the person is born with certain tendencies, certain predilections, certain characteristics, extreme from one another, nuanced in between, and therefore each of us have certain tendencies. Now, why was a human being endowed with intelligence? An animal, its behavior is based on what? Instinct. Everything is instinctive. It doesn't have the ability to make choices. Its function is purely based the way Hashem programs it. It's programmed. Based on the DNA of a lion determines its physical structure. Every aspect of the lion or any species is determined by the DNA of that particular species. Its neurological system, its brain, has nothing to do with deciding its behavior. It's purely its physical function. And its senses. Its senses is based on the DNA, and the brain functions, and all the systems function on the DNA, which is purely instinctive. A human being is not the case. We have DNA, and we have certain predilections because of that DNA. Behavior patterns. It's not only because it's role modeled after the parent, but sometimes the behavior pattern is rooted in the DNA, why a person behaves the way he does. Certain people have insatiable appetites. Other people are stoic in personalities. That's part of their DNA. But in addition to that, we're endowed with intelligence. That intelligence gives us the ability to make decisions and to override even our tendencies. A person, for instance, he has an insatiable appetite, and he knows eating more than the minimum is not in his best interest. And ultimately, it will compromise his health and his function. Understanding that and appreciating that and realizing the consequence, the ramification of that, he's going to rein in on himself. He's going to control himself. An animal, everything's based on its DNA. It's instinctively. It does what it does at certain periods of time. If the circumstances are such, that's the reality. Now, there's the problem. There's a concept known, and it's a Torah concept. If a person has a conflict of interest, this infringes on his objectivity. He's not as objective. If you have a judge who's biased, he's not qualified to render a verdict in that case because he's biased against one of the defendants, or that topic is a certain topic. The way he always rules leniently because he has difficulty ruling differently than his bias. He's not qualified to rule. He has to be totally objective. What's objective? Within the concept of human objectivity, you have to be balanced. If you're balanced, that you don't value one side more than the other, you're what we call impartial. If a person's impartial, then we can talk about objectivity. If a person loses his impartiality, he's no longer objective. Because that means there's bias. Once there's bias, you cannot be impartial. Now, very often the Talmud would say, and it presents a law, and it cites a source for the law. What's the source for the law? A verse in the Torah. So the Talmud asks, what do we need a verse? Lama likros svarhu. Since it's such obvious logic, and man is endowed with intelligence, there's no reason for the Torah to write a verse. That's how obvious it is. You understand? If the sun is shining, you don't have to tell me the sun is shining. If you're indoors or in a cave, you have to tell me the sun is shining to go out of the cave. But if you're outside and you have the ability to see, you don't have to tell me the sun is shining. It's obvious it's shining. If certain concepts and values are obvious, the Torah doesn't have to speak about values and concepts. Because since you're endowed with intelligence itself leads you, it gives you an understanding of that value or that particular issue. But what's the problem? The problem is we have biases. We have conflicts, like we spoke about. A person has insatiable appetite, and he's drawn to eat things which are unhealthy, compromises his health, and he reads about nutrition and he's instructed by his doctor. He has a problem. He has a tug of war here. He has a conflict of interest. Here, naturally, he wants to indulge in food, which is detrimental to his health. But simultaneously, intellectually, he understands he has to withdraw, he has to suppress it. So there's a tug of war. There's a tug of war between his physical tendencies, what he gravitates to, what he wants, his desires, and the intellect. The intellect says, don't. It's not in your best interest. Ultimately, it's going to compromise you, and you're going to regret you did it. But factually, since it's not immediate, it's something which is a little bit later. It's, we'll say, like causality. Person deludes himself, says it's okay now. Although he knows it's not. Ultimately, he's going to regret it. But a human being could somehow, because of in conflict, go in a state of denial for the moment as if it doesn't exist at the moment. So the person is endowed with intelligence to be able to make decisions and make choices. What does one have to do to maximize on his endowment, which is called intelligence, which allows him to make choices? You know what you have to do? You have to get to the equidistant point between the two extremes. And when you're in the middle, now you can be rational, objective, and make a correct decision. Okay, I'm just going to repeat it again. The Rambam is going to explain to you how, if a person is off balance, how to get balanced. And he explains it's like a pendulum. A pendulum swings from side to side. If it's in the center, eventually, when it stops swinging, it's in the center. So what about if the pendulum is set off center? It'll never be in the center. It's always off to one side. A human being is created, we're like a pendulum. It gets stuck to the right, it gets stuck to the left. We have to condition ourselves, despite the fact, naturally, with condition, our tendencies, our predilections are to the right or to the left. There's the human being, based on his intellect, has the ability to condition himself that you're able to reach the mid-center point, the equidistant point between the two extremes, and as a result of that, now you're balanced. Now that you're balanced, that bias is no longer there to infringe on your objectivity, and now you can be impartial to make a correct decision. We're going to elaborate on this. I'll give you an example. You know, you have a horse. They used to have a Bronco. It was an untamed horse. To be able to ride that horse, the horse has to be broken. They break the Bronco. And only by somebody who could take control of that horse, and despite its rebelliousness and its natural power to go against the rider somehow could rein in on it, and ultimately the horse submits to the control of the rider. And eventually the horse rides normally, doesn't try to throw its rider. But how does that happen? It's not by riding it once or twice. It's over an extended period of time by breaking the Bronco. Now the Bronco is rideable. And whenever the rider now gives it an order to empower it, now it draws on that ability that it had initially as the unbridled horse. That's the way it is. The same thing with us. We have tendencies. There's certain times you have to do something with a gusto. Shabbos, there's a mitzvah called Oneg Shabbos. When you eat, you have to enjoy the food. There's a mitzvah to enjoy the food on Shabbos. During the week, but the more you enjoy, the more you gravitate that you want more of it. Shabbos, it's a mitzvah. We have to balance ourselves that whenever we see food, we don't start salivating. Because if the moment you see food, you start salivating, and if you have a tendency for eating, immediately you become mesmerized with the food and your intellect becomes impaired. And when it becomes impaired, you're no longer in control of yourself. As a result of that, you have to put yourself in the position where you're the equidistant point from the right to the left, that you're in the center, that when you see food, you don't lose control. You're not drawn there in a way where you're not rational. You're always able to maintain your rational balance and make the right decision at the particular time. A person is famished. He hasn't eaten. And he overeats because he's famished. Afterwards, he regrets that he overate. But why did he overeat? Because he was famished. A person who truly has control over himself, even when he hasn't eaten in a while and he is famished, he will only eat as he normally eats, maybe slightly more. We're not perfect, but we'll not go to the extreme because that person is a balanced person. He controls himself and he lives a life of control. The best example is when you raise a child is what? Born naturally. He's not in any way, he has habits, but the habits are inborn habits. Now you send your child to school, and the child has responsibilities at a very base minimum level. Study. He has to do his homework. If a child doesn't develop study habits, that during a period of time, he has to attend to what he is responsible to do, ultimately, he's not going to be fully an effective, productive person. Because unless you have habits, proper habits, that you take control over yourself. So the best time, when is a child malleable? When is a human being malleable? When you're young. It's like you have a piece of clay. It's malleable, you could form it and develop it. Once it dries, gets a little older, it's not as malleable. So if you raise a child with study habits, with values, even though initially the child had other values, natural values, which are contrary to what appropriate behavior is, but you can condition the child and teach him what proper behavior is. And once the child is molded into that form, so to say, which is a proper form, now the child is able to maximize over his abilities, his intellect, because now he's working within a framework of what? Of appropriate behavior or appropriate control. Now your intellect, you can maximize it because you're in an orderly pattern. Once spoken about, we find Avraham Avinu, Abraham, the founding patriarch of the Jewish people. He's known as the pillar of loving kindness. Torah speaks about his hospitality, that his home had 4 entrances, and any direction you would approach his home, you were able to enter into his home. And he would host his guests as if they were princes. And the Torah tells over a story that it was the 3rd day after circumcision, and it was the hottest day in existence. From the beginning of creation till then, there was no hotter day. So there were no wayfarers, there were no guests. And Avram was pained. And because he was pained, Hashem sent 3 angels in human form. Okay? What was the objective of Avram's hospitality? Because since he lived in a paganistic world, they were pagans. Through his hospitality, he would bring them to monotheism. Because whoever he entered his home, he engaged in this theological discussion. And by the end of the night, or the end of the period of hospitality, the people believed in monotheism because he refuted and he showed that paganism is a baseless perspective. That was Avraham Avinu. So the Torah goes and describes exactly how he did his hospitality. He sees 3 wayfarers coming down the road, and he sees them, he runs towards them. Now, let's talk about who is Avraham Avinu. At the time, he was 99 years old. What are his credentials? His credentials were, he went to battle with the 4 mightiest kings of the world, and he defeated them. Those were his accomplishments. When we talk about a 5-star general, Eisenhower would pale to Avraham Avinu. You understand? Eisenhower led D-Day. Avraham Avinu, he decimated the enemy. There was no enemy left by the time he finished. That's Avraham Avinu. After that, he was declared by the world as the Prince of God. Avraham Avinu, when he came back from Egypt, He had a level of wealth that the land cannot carry his wealth, meaning there wasn't enough pasture land for his flocks and his herds, and had such wealth. So this man is wealthy. He has slaves. He has servants. He has money. There's nothing he can't do. And his hospitality is like what? Royalty. And that's the way he hosts his guests, like royalty. And he's 99 years old, recovering from his circumcision. He sees these three wayfarers. He runs towards them. He prostrates himself. Could you imagine? He prostrates himself to these three wayfarers, and he asks them to accept his hospitality. And they graciously accept. Could you imagine? Three wayfarers. Three homeless people walking down the street. You run to them and you beg them. And prostration is a negation. It's full prostration. I'm like the dust of the earth in your presence. You hear this? And he invites them in. Rest under the shade of my tree, wash your feet, gives them, royal treatment. And then he begins his discussion, his hospitality. Slaughters 3 calves for them, butter, milk, bread, everything fresh. Wasn't exactly a vegan diet, okay? Can't satisfy everybody. Okay? Now, so the obvious question is, Avram had slaves, he had servants. Avram Avinu had to be the one to be involved in every aspect of this hospitality. Avram Avinu, could you imagine you visit the White House and you're an American citizen? Could you imagine the President of the United States prostrating himself before you entered into the Oval Office? Avram Avinu was beyond that level, and yet he prostrates himself. To who? The three wayfarers, ordinary people. And even if they weren't ordinary, they were princes. But Avram is a greater prince than they are. What did he prostrate himself for? What's it all about? That's a question we asked in the past. When I approach a person, even today, and the person has a sense of what I represent. The person wants to convince me to take on his perspective, but he has his own ideas. So subconsciously, what happens? The person puts up every line of defense that he doesn't want to be convinced. He wants to take a step back to be able to pass judgment on what's being said. So he puts up barriers immediately. And the only way you could convince him, you have to break through all those barriers. You have to strip those barriers, and only then could you get through. As you said, you could get a word in edgewise. Only then. Why? Because a person has a natural defense system that if you want to affect me, I don't want to be convinced. I want to be convinced, but in a way, not where you're somehow approaching me where I'm not going to appreciate certain things, and certain things won't be recognizable because due to your influence. So what does Avram do? Avram approaches these two wayfarers and he prostrates himself. So the first thing that enters these people's minds, what does this man want from us? What does he want? It's unheard of. A man of such wealth should prostrate himself. Evidently, he wants something. He wants something. What does he want? Does he want our money? Avram needs nobody's money. Does he want us to revere him? He doesn't need our reverence because the whole world reveres him because he was declared and proclaimed by the world as the Prince of God. Maybe he's concerned for his safety, and he has to have as many friends to protect him. Avram went to battle with the 4 mightiest kings. He needed nobody to protect him. So any reason why he's approaching them in this manner, there's only one answer. You know what the answer is? It must be he sees something in us which is so special, which we ourselves don't even appreciate who we are. And that's why he's negating himself to us. That's why he's prostrating himself. He doesn't need our honor. He doesn't need our protection. He doesn't need our own money. So whatever reason why a person would do something has no relevance to Avram Avinu. So what is Avram's interest? Us. When a person feels the interest is you, the person becomes an open book. I'm attentive. I want to listen because I know you're interested in my best interest. And if a person has that sense and you have that level of trust, then you can influence that person. And that's why Avram Avinu was successful. Anybody who ever walked through his door, he always was successful in his debate or his dialogue. By the end of the day or the end of the night, the person was a monotheist. Because any reason why a person would put up these subconscious barriers or walls, Avram stripped those walls even before he began the conversation. Just with the nature of his hospitality, the person understood Avram wants nothing from him except what would be in his best interest, in the individual's best interest. Therefore, Avram was always successful. That's the way it works. Every one of us, because we have biases, natural biases, we immediately put up barriers. Subconsciously, we have barriers because we're not balanced. If you favor one thing, you're off kilter. Let's say a person naturally is not a giving person. Not somebody that says, I want to come see you. What do you want to see me about? Well, I have an institution. You know something, I'm very tied up now. Maybe call me back in a month. That's usually the way it is. I don't even know you. You heard that I help people. You want to be helped. I can't help everyone. But I don't say that to the man. I'm too busy now. And the person really is busy. But if it would gain your interest enough, you'll make time for the man. They used to have years ago, a person was a vacuum cleaner salesman. You remember? People sold vacuum cleaners. You knock on the door, I have a vacuum. Then he would take 2 hours of your time just taking it apart and showing you all the different parts of the vacuum. And then you ask him, how much does it cost? It cost an arm and a leg to buy that vacuum. He says, but you realize you can buy a warranty and you get this. Until he finished with you. You regretted you let him through the front door. He wasted so much of your time. Next time, you get another call, another vacuum salesman. Say, I'm sorry, I have no time. Why not? It's one of a kind of vacuum. Your wife doesn't have to work as hard. Because the person had a bad experience in the past, he has every barrier he puts up. This man is going to convince him to do something that maybe he doesn't want to do. But if you take away all the reasons why they're not, then the person is rational and he can make a rational decision based on his intellect. Is it the right thing to do or is not the right thing to do? But if you have a bias, automatically the intelligence, the ability, what you were endowed with to make that evaluation, it's off balance. You know, it's very interesting. The Torah says there's a negative commandment. If a person owns weights and measures which are not honest, even to possess them, even if you don't short weight a person, you're in violation of even possessing weights and measures which are not accurate, because you may use those weights and measures. To have an inaccurate scale or measure, of course, you're not permitted. That's called stealing. But even to possess the weights and measures which are not accurate, even that's not permitted. We're given weights and measures. We're also, everything is an evaluation. That's what life's all about. We make evaluations. You have to weigh it. Do you have to weigh both sides of the equation? Is it right? Is it wrong? But if you have a bias, and that bias you could have dealt with, and you did not deal with it, in certain situations, you have liability. I said something interesting yesterday on the Parsha. Now, there's a famous word which we once discussed, the Rambam. A human being is endowed with free choice. The first 5 plagues, there were 10 plagues that came upon Egypt. The first 5 plagues, the Torah tells us, Pharaoh hardened his own heart. He had free choice. From the 6th plague onward, God hardened his heart. Pharaoh had no free choice any longer. But nevertheless, even though he didn't have free choice, he was held accountable for the time he had no free choice. So the Rambam asks, but if he had no free choice, why was he held accountable? For his behavior, for his decisions. He had no choice. So the Rambam says, choice is a gift. It's a gift. If you abuse that gift, the punishment is God withdraws that ability. So why did God withdraw the ability for Pharaoh to make choice, to have free choice? Because he abused it. So he was the one who was the cause that he had no choice. He chose not to have choice. So when you choose not to have choice, when you're in that position, the reason why you have no choice is because you chose. So if that's the case, you're held accountable for not having choice, and as if you did have choice. That's the understanding of the Rambam. The example I always give, you have a child, he has a privilege, and the child abuses the privilege. So the father says to his son, you abuse it one more time, I'm withdrawing the privilege. And he crosses that line again, father withdraws the privilege. The son says, my father's a bad person. He doesn't give me this any longer. He mistreats me because he's not giving me what I want. I mistreat you. You're the cause of your own predicament. Because you abuse the choice, you're the cause why you don't have that treatment any longer or that privilege any longer. So the person is the cause of why he no longer has that choice or that privilege. That's what it's about. So we say it was from the sixth plague onward because he abused. He could have seen clearly because they revealed miracles. He could have seen the hand of God. And he turned his back on God 5 times. God says from now on, when it was obvious to you, you turned your back on me. Even when I'll be obvious to me, you can no longer turn your back on me. Because you're not even going to have the ability to turn your back. I'm withdrawing your free choice. That's the way the Rambam learns. But the difficulty is, if you read the portion, Hashem says to Moshe, I will harden his heart. So Rashi asks the question immediately, but he didn't harden his heart by the first 5. So Rashi says, when he says, I will harden his heart, he's referring to the 6th plague and beyond. That's, I will harden his heart. So I wanted to say, very often God gives us challenges and God knows exactly how you're going to decide. Like, why did Hashem give Moshe the challenge to speak to rock or hit the rock? And because he hit the rock, Moshe did not go into the promised land. Because God did not want him to go in. So God gave him the choice, which he knew he would fail, although he had free choice. So he should not go into the promised land because Moshe had to be buried opposite the area where they sinned with the Balpor idolatry. He had to be buried there. Since ultimately God understood that Paro will make bad choices the first 5 times, he gave him choices that he knew he would fail. So from the 6th time onward, he should not have free choice. So really, when he hardened his heart, he says, I will harden his heart. That means even the choices he gave him initially, they were choices he was going to fail because he knew he was going to make those choices that he would fail. So ultimately, from 6 onward, he should not have free choice. That's the idea. So therefore, we have to understand what's coming down the pike. Life is complicated. Life, there are many decisions we make throughout life, as many years as we have. To try to make the correct decision, or to be as close as we can to be correct, we got to be balanced. Person chooses, I'll do what I want. I'll behave the way I want. I'll have all my biases. I speak my mind. I do what I want. Okay. With that attitude, you're going to go through life with that. So you're going to a person limps. And you could go through rehab and overcome that limp. It's too painful, I choose not to. Okay, so for the rest of your life, you're gonna have that limp. You're gonna be off balance. And when you have to have that stability to both on your feet, you're not gonna have it, you're gonna fall on your face. And that's what life's all about. The sooner you correct this impairment, which is called off balance, because nobody's perfectly balanced, we always try to get that equidistant point to be able to be totally impartial, that our intellect should make that correct evaluation to make the right choice. The Mishnah tells us in Pirkei Avos you should pray for the welfare of government. Why? Because as long as there's fear of government, people behave themselves. But the moment there's no law and order, people literally will eat one another alive. So I asked the question, you mean to say the only reason why people behave ethically, morally, because they're going to go to prison, because there's law and order? That's what it means? It's a poor commentary on humanity. People say, I don't steal because I know it's wrong. It's not because I'm concerned of prison time. Or I don't kill, God forbid, because I'm concerned about my life is going to be taken. That's not the reason. But yet it says in Pirkei Avos, you should pray for the welfare of government, because if there's no fear of government, everybody will turn into a predator. So the way we explained it in the past was this. How do you put things in perspective? If you have a normal environment, then you're able to appreciate the right and wrong in things. The moment there's chaos, everything becomes out of order. When things get out of order, you can't appreciate the wrong in anything. Then you go into a survival mode. When you're in a survival mode, you feel and you justify, for the sake of survival, you kill the next person, even if you have to eat him alive. But if there's a structure, there's a framework, and the people who misbehave are punished, now we could think and act and internalize and live like rational people. That's how we explained it. Because it will not be tolerated. The moment it's not tolerated, now I have an appreciation for the wrongness of whatever that is. That's the concept. Very interesting. So I always say, you should pray for the welfare of government, because if you have that framework and that structure of society, people could appreciate and say what's right and what's wrong. What about behavior patterns which are not dictated and controlled by government? A Jew goes beyond what the secular society demands. A Jew is not supposed to speak Lashon Hara. You're not supposed to say things negative about another person unless it has constructive value. A Jew is not permitted to violate the Shabbos. A Jew has to keep diet. The endless laws. It's not dictated by the government. So if he's telling me that a person has to live within a certain framework, and that framework is determined by fear of punishment, because that puts you in a rational state of mind, so how do we cover the whole gamut of Judaism? You know what the answer is? There's such a thing called Yiras Shamayim. You have fear of heaven. As it says, you should pray for the fear of government. And that puts you into a rational framework. You should pray to God that you should have a cognizance of Him, that you also have that framework. As a result of that, you feel there's accountability. Once you understand there's accountability, you relate and understand the wrongness of whatever it is, what's wrong, and appreciate what's right, why it's so right. So it's the same concept. The way God created a human being, that if you have a sense, you revere or you fear, then all of a sudden clarity comes into the picture. But if there's no fear, there's no reverence, and everything is happy-go-lucky, you do whatever you want, automatically you lose the clarity. And you rationalize, we justify anything we want. That's the understanding. So I can tell you, years ago, when you go to yeshiva, today it's a different world than what it used to be. When you went to yeshiva, there were rules. And these rules could not be bent. You had a person, he was called a mashgiach, like you have a mashgiach, a supervisor in the kitchen, to make sure the dietary laws are adhered to. Otherwise, they pull the certification, and the man is put out of business. He can't be a kosher caterer. There was a person, he was called Dean of Men. And he himself had an ability to evaluate a student, and he understood exactly how he has to be tweaked and how he has to be mentored to be able to maximize on his potential. And if you stepped out of line, you heard about it. And because the person was such a special person, you respected him, you wouldn't dare cross his word. So that person representing that automatically kept you in line. When you're kept in line, then you have an appreciation for what those teachings are. If you're not kept in line and you feel I can do whatever I want, you don't appreciate the value of whatever those teachings are. But if you're within a certain framework, which the yeshiva represents that framework, because of the way the infrastructure of what that is that at one time, today it's not the same. As a result of that, you're able to maximize on your potential because you appreciate what's valuable and you discard what which has no value. When I studied in yeshiva, a daily lecture, 6 days a week, was an hour and 45 minutes every single day. And there was information without continuous. Literally, it was just a feed, kept coming. And you had to pay attention, be focused. I'm not talking about a 10-year-old. I'm talking people who were 19, 20, 21, 22. It just flowed. And you had to be attentive for an hour and 45 minutes. You take notes, and you didn't even speak up. You only ask the question if it really is something you didn't understand. Otherwise, you waited until afterwards. And you just absorbed and absorbed it. How do you keep such attention? Hour and 45 minutes. Today, in most yeshivas, maximum lecture is 50 minutes. You hear this from hour 45 minutes down to 50 minutes. Of course, in today's society, even people who study, their attention span is no more than 50 minutes, an hour maximum. What happened? The answer is because the whole infrastructure, our society, it's a different infrastructure. We used to live in a more conservative, people were more reined in. The society was a reined in society. We weren't going in every direction. As a result of that, we were able to maximize on that focus. And once you have that focus, you're able to gain much more. And then we didn't have the computer, you could download. Today, everybody's an expert in every subject. Why? You just download it. And you think the man is proficient in the whole Talmud. At one time, unless you studied it, you didn't know it. It wasn't this superficial information. Then you had to really plow through it and work on it and really internalize it. Otherwise, you did not retain it. And that's why today, unless he has his notes, the man can't give the lecture. At one time, it became so embedded in you, if you were a good student, you didn't need notes. You were able to lecture from memory for that reason.